All right. If I can have everyone's attention, if you can find a seat. If you don't have a seat, we'll have to ask you to wait outside. We have a limit as to what we can do as far as seats in the room. Otherwise, the fire marshal says everyone else has to wait outside. I apologize. What we'll do, I think we do have 3 bills that we'll be hearing this afternoon. The one bill, HB 938, will not be heard today. So if you're here on House Bill 938 by Representative Prince, that bill is being held and taken off the calendar. And give you all a moment to sort through. We do have a sign-up sheet for the 3 other measures we have today. I think there's a lot of people here on the interest of Representative Spencer's bill, HB 734. Is that correct? Why don't you come forward, Representative Spencer, and have one of the seats at the testimony. Yeah, somebody want to bring with you? And we need to get our legislative council seated somewhere. When she has a moment. Thank you, Ms. Travis. Why don't move that sign-up sheet so that we can put it on the corner. And anybody wants to sign it, just let it be sitting there on the corner. I'll bring it up front when we're starting to have individuals testify. All right, so we've got everyone seated or out in the hall. Very well. Representative Spencer, you're up for House Bill 734, and that was in subcommittee of Representative Fleming. You're Representative Caldwell. Why don't you tell us a report from your committee, if you would, on the bill? Use your mic, if you would. So that one, okay. There you are.
Mr. Chairman, we reported House Bill 734 out, substitute to that. It was amended by the committee and then sent to full committee.
All right, sir. Thank you, Mr. Spence. Go ahead, Mr. Spencer.
We passed out. We were working on the substitute LC 363010, and it was amended. And I guess the substitute you have before you is 296994S.
Correct.
So I'm just going to walk through the bill after a few comments. Georgia has an opportunity to take a part in a $330 billion per year commercial spaceflight industry. This is an industry that's growing. Satellites are getting smaller, payloads are getting smaller, and there are 2 sites on the East Coast that have reached a saturation point, and they are federal sites in Wallops Island, Virginia, and in Cape Canaveral. Camden County actually has history of space history there, where we did test the most powerful rocket engine back in the 1960s for NASA. So there is some existing infrastructure there, and that's how we popped up on the commercial space industry's radar for a possible another East Coast site, specifically mainly focused on commercial space flight. And so we have that opportunity. And one of the things that the industry looks for is a standard. There is a standard already in Florida. There's a standard in Texas, New Mexico, and the other space states. There's 7 of them. And what we're trying to do with the Georgia Space Flight Act is to be competitive. And so what is before you is language that's very similar to other language in these space laws, particularly Texas. I looked at Texas and Florida as a model to draft this bill. So as we have come out of subcommittee, I'm going to start to walk through the substitute or the committee substitute 6994S. Starting at line 17, you've got the definition of crew member, and the crew member cannot be a spaceflight participant, which the spaceflight participant is actually subject to the shield that I'm creating here in House Bill 734. Just to be clear, this waiver only deals with a willing spaceflight participant and does not involve the uninvolved public. There are standards set in federal statute that requires cross waivers of claims, whereas spaceflight participants have to waive their right at that point to pursue liability claims. And so the federal statute has that in it as well. And what this bill tries to do is provide a clarity, because when a case is actually brought before federal court, they're going to look at Georgia's tort laws to determine how we handle this issue if the launch actually took place in Georgia. So it's going to look at Georgia's tort law, and what we're trying to do is essentially write our own destiny here a little bit when they refer to case law here in Georgia. So that's part one of, or line 17 as we start the definitions there. If you go to the second page, starting at lines 24, these are the definitions, which is sort of typical of our style here in Georgia Code. And getting down to line 44 is spaceflight activities. And spaceflight activities, this definition was actually reduced a little bit from subcommittee, as you see here. And so this is what actually defines what a space flight activity is. It conducts launches. It's kind of a sort of an enumerated list there, but not exhaustive by any means. And then we all start with the definitions of spaceflight entity as well. Moving on to the next page, starting at lines 61. This is a continuation of that. If you go down to line 70, it defines spaceflight participant. This is who we're talking about in terms of liability shield. This involves individuals not only carried aboard, but also those who are taking steps toward being carried aboard, such as training and orientations to go aboard a vessel. Going down into line 77, you have spaceflight participant injury. It starts to define that. And the injury must relate to the spaceflight activity. This particular bill limits injuries to those from the inherent risk associated with spaceflight. Now, if you kind of move forward a little bit on lines 112 and 124, it talks about inherent risks, and so that's what it's referring to. And so that way you're kind of keeping the bill sort of in context there with that definition. Moving to section 51.342, which starts at 83. This is the liability shield. It basically says if you're going to, go into space and you're going to sign a waiver. When you sign that waiver, you're going to waive that liability and for that particular action. So what they have to do is go through a written consent. They have to be informed about this. And as we move down to lines 91, it says nothing in this code section shall, 1, limit liability for space flight injury. And then it says, A, proximately caused by spaceflight entities' negligence for the safety of the spaceflight participant. Now, this is an important aspect of the bill, and it was amended in subcommittee to strike the word gross in front of negligence. I think this is important to discuss because now with that particular language there, it essentially makes the entire 51.341A, that paragraph above, essentially legally null. And so, therefore, it makes Georgia the least competitive state among the space states when we enter this race to get a piece of that $330 billion pie of the commercial space industry. That particular amendment also arguably conflicts with federal policy regarding claims by the spaceflight participants, and therefore it can be preempted. Just keep in mind, though, the ultimate insurer of licensed space launch operators is the federal government. This is why it is required that the parties bear their own respective financial responsibilities and losses for launch activities. This means the federal government would likely be party to such a claim, anticipated by 51.342, and its strongest argument is express preemption, since Georgia permits a claim that federal law seeks to preclude. And this is important because federal policy decided to do this because the commercial spaceflight industry was not growing, and when they made these federal statutes to kind of protect the industry a little bit, now we're seeing a flourishing of the industry. I think this is one of the few things Congress gets right, and they've done this pretty right. And so this legislation at the federal level has had bipartisan support, and most recently, about 2 days before Thanksgiving, President Barack Obama signed that amendment to the Competitive Space Launch Act into law. So this is something Republicans and Democrats have agreed on at the federal level, and that's essentially what this policy is essentially doing in Georgia, is to sort of fill the gap where some of that federal policy doesn't take into consideration, like when they have to review a claim in federal court. So again, I think the amendment that was made in subcommittee essentially makes the bill that you have before you essentially very, very weak in terms of us being competitive in Georgia as compared to other states like Florida and Texas. So I'm urging the committee to consider amending this bill to put back the word gross in front of negligence. And so that is my hope for this committee. Moving on to lines 96 of this substitute, just to be clear, as I stated before, this only deals with the spaceflight participant. It does not deal with the uninvolved public, and that's expressly stated on lines 96. So it doesn't limit the liability of any spaceflight entity against any person other than the spaceflight participant. And I mentioned previously that there's an insurance requirement that the federal government requires for such claims. As we move down to lines 110, you're looking at the waiver language here. Again, this is modeled off of the agritourism language. It's also a similar language is in the equine statute that we have in Georgia law, and I think that is going to be 4-12-2. That's the equine language, and a lot of that has mimics that. Of course, we've adapted that to space flight and sort of looked at other states that have similar waivers. I want to thank Representative Stacey Evans and Representative Kelly for working with me on this language to kind of achieve that. However, I will go back to the previous comment about the legal nullity that the amendment in subcommittee creates. Essentially makes this waiver useless at this point. So again, I urge the committee to consider that amendment. I'm going to move to page 5, particularly at line 145. We require a 24-hour think it over period. So people who are wanting to go into space, they are typically wealthy individuals. They've got $300,000 to burn. They've got, in some cases, some orbital flights cost $20 million. So that's what Russia's doing, and these particular individuals have bargaining power. They know what they're getting into, and that's the risk they want to take. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, that really concludes my walkthrough of the bill, and I'll take any questions you may have or the committee may have.
All right, thank you. I believe we started over here. Did you have yours pushed, Mr. Bruce? Okay, that's right, got off that. Over here we have Ms. Oliver.
I was not on the subcommittee, so forgive me if I'm playing a little catch-up here.
Okay.
I understand that this bill is required or just preferred based on the federal statute that's been passed.
The bill is necessary because it sets an industry standard. That's number one. Number two, it also provides legal clarity. That's probably the most important thing. The reason why it provides legal clarity is when a claim is filed in court and the federal government will have
I'm going to interrupt you
jurisdiction
if I
over
may.
this. Yes.
Does the federal statute create a limited liability on these companies in and of itself?
I want to defer. Let me defer to my legal counsel here.
Okay,
on
let me
that.
ask a couple other than
Sure.
well, if I may. None of these change of law or change of rights affects anybody other than the person who voluntarily chooses to get in the spacecraft.
Correct. The original bill, which you may have heard of,
Right.
there were some provisions in there dealing with noise and nuisance.
All of that's gone.
All of that is gone to keep the bill moving.
And the
We
federal statute only applies to somebody getting in the spacecraft, or is the federal statute more broad in terms of?
It particularly deals with spaceflight participants, but I can defer to legal to get more
Okay.
specifics on that. But it requires the federal statute requires the spaceflight participant and the operator, to go through a cost waivers of claims of what you're going to hold each other liable for. So that's
Okay.
my general understanding of the federal statute.
And somebody will, whoever you prefer, will explain to me a little bit more detail about why we need this statute. And
Okay.
in that context, if we don't make the amendment you wish us to make, do you still want us to pass it?
I do. I want to keep this bill moving in the process.
Thank you. Next we have Ms. Evans, that's you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Representative Spencer, can you remind me if there was any other place where we changed gross negligence to negligence besides line 93?
To my knowledge, that was the only area that was changed.
I was looking. I think it is too, but I just wanted to check.
I don't think there was another. Well, there is in the very last.
Ms. Travis is
but it wasn't
agreeing with
changed.
us.
Yeah, but that wasn't changed. Yeah.
Okay.
That was the only part that was changed to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Did you want to have the gentleman with you identified, let him speak about the issue? Let me point out to the members of the committee, we have in your file a document that we prepared for you, which is called Gross Negligence, Other Standards for Inherently Dangerous Activities in Georgia. And I guess you would say that getting in a spacecraft is an inherently dangerous activity.
I would agree.
All right. Identify your guests with you.
I have here with me Jason Kemp to my right, and I have Mr. Joe Hardy with the Hardy Law Firm. They're experts in space and aviation law.
All right. Mr. Hardy.
Oh, thank you. To your question about the federal limited liability, there are provisions in the federal law that requirements for launch licensing for spaceflight participants to waive claims against spaceflight operators. Those aren't self-executing, and they're a little bit vague. It just says you will have somewhere cross waivers of claims. So Georgia. No, just about one sentence, cross waivers of claims. They do mention injuries, but they don't get into detail like this does. And again, they're not self-executing. So there is some one case we know of, there's federal case law precedent that says if the parties fail to do that, we're not going to plug it in there. We're not going to say you waive the claims. We're going to look to what the state law says on torts. In that case, I forget the state, but they looked in there and there was no case law. So, there was no, nothing said what happens if you don't fill this in here. So they didn't know what to do in that case.
Does it make sense to you that there's no case law, period? I mean, because federal statute says you have to cross waiver. If somebody chooses to get into this and signs a waiver,
Mm-hmm.
and it blows up and there's a lawsuit, doesn't Georgia have law that would say general negligence applies?
I imagine you could try to find something that did apply. What this law intends to do is say, here's the law in plain English. Here's what you look to when you have this gap.
And it changes Georgia's law on the issue of negligence.
Well, the way, I'm not sure exactly what Georgia law would say right now about the spaceflight activities. And that's kind of the purpose of the bill, is to make it clear that this is the standard that applies. And as Representative Spencer was saying, right now, at least for this law, it says you're not liable as long as you're not negligent. I'm not really sure what that means. What Representative Spencer is asking you to put in there is a gross negligence standard, so that if you sign this and take a flight and are injured, you can only hold them liable if the spaceflight participant was grossly negligent. And I know Georgia law does have case law that says you can voluntarily sign waivers for types of things like that. But, again, you have to go through the various cases to find out if and when it applies, especially in something like this that's never been tested before. And there, I don't know if I'd say that it's required under the federal state regime to have this, but it fills in a gap, it makes it clear, and I agree with Representative Spencer that it is required if you want space industry to come here.
Is every state that has a spaceport?
Use your mic, I'm sorry.
My fault, Mr. Chairman. Does every state that has a spaceport pass something like this?
Yes.
Which
With-
is 2 states?
No,
7.
No,
Seven.
there are seven
Seven.
space-friendly states, and they all have a waiver
A
for
standard.
spaceflight. Yes.
With the standard being gross negligence.
All right. Ms. Jones, that's yours. What's yours, Mr. Bruce? Roger Bruce.
I'm not an attorney, so
Neither am I.
what do you get with this legislation that you can't get with just a contract between whoever's going to space and company?
Well, a lot of times there is a case that's out there. It's called Martin Marietta, and in that case, there were no cross waivers of claims put in the contract that was required by federal statute. Okay, so you can actually create a contract saying, "Oh, you can't hold me liable for this or that," but if it doesn't follow federal statute, okay, to put in those cross waivers of claims, then the contract is not picking up where it needs to, and so this is one way to fill that gap when those contracts aren't executing those cross waivers of claim that the federal statute requires, because it has happened, and that's what happened in Martin versus Marietta.
All right. One last thing, can I nominate someone to be a space flight participant? I see an old friend in the audience, Charlie Smith, that I served with back when I first started in the legislature. And I saw Charlie earlier today. Charlie is now the chairman, of the Development Authority, Camden County. My first encounter with Charlie was my third day in the session. I walked in and there was a picture of a flag on my desk. And Charlie was a floor leader for the governor's office and came over and introduced himself and asked me how I was going to vote on that. So the rest is history. Anyone else, want to say further comments, Mr. Spencer? That cover it?
I think
We got several people who are wanting to speak on the bill. Did you have yours? I'm sorry, you just got here? All right, pull your mic in. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Spencer, I have a question about the warning and agreement language, where it talks in a couple of places about inherent risks. What does that word inherent mean there, and is it something less than all risks? Because as spaceflight becomes more common and safer, are certain things an inherent risk now that wouldn't be later? For example, I'm thinking when airplanes were first invented, the first person who got in one was probably very brave, but now you don't consider crashing on takeoff and landing an inherent risk of most plane flights. So does that word inherent need to be there, and does it limit the risks that will be waived?
That's an issue we try to tackle in the first draft, and we try to get more specific in terms of the inherent risk, because that can be interpreted in any jurisdiction. Like in California, may interpret what inherent risk may be according to their assumption of risk doctrine they hold in California. It may be different in New Mexico, but I want to kind of let you get the more legalistic answers from one of these gentlemen. But we did look at that, but we reverted back to this standard because of what we see already in Texas and Florida. They use the same language, inherent risk. So one of you guys want to tackle that?
Yeah, if I could clarify that a little bit. Actually, this term inherent risk was not in the initial draft, and that was following the Texas model. Texas did not use the term inherent risk. Some states do, some states don't. To me, if you have the word inherent risk in there, it does exactly what you're saying. It adds a little bit of unclarity and something to argue over.
Right.
On the other hand, it limits it more to, it doesn't give a broad slate, which I think is the concern, that if you don't say inherent risks, you might be overprotecting somebody you don't want to. So I think through the various discussions, it went from a very broad, not using inherent risks, to putting in inherent risks. But you're right, you can't define inherent risks, especially for something this new. And we've seen people out there discussing the same issue. And if you want, Jason here might be able to give you some examples of what some people think might be an inherent risk and some might not. We just don't know until it's litigated.
Because if you just look at the dictionary definition of inherent, it's something that is permanent and inseparable. But as we're just getting into spaceflight, something that is a permanent element now may be perfected in the future. So I think what we consider an inherent risk may change as we go forward.
I agree. If you'd like, I'm sure Representative Spencer would love to strike that word, but I think that was part of compromise. Because exactly, what you're saying right now is a perfect example of what can happen, of was this accident inherent or not.
We've got several more people who are going to speak to the bill, and I'm going to start with the top, the first signers, and I believe that's Eric Stallmer. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, sir.
Come forward, y'all. move back, and we'll let these individuals. And after Mr. Stallmer, I have Michael Mealing. Are you all together or separate? Okay, come on up front, though. We'll have 2 chairs. We'll have each of you available. All right. Pull that second mic around. Mr. Stallmer, you go first, please, sir. Identify yourself and state your position on the bill.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me today, sir. My name is Eric Stallmer. I'm president of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. We're a trade association in Washington, D.C., and we represent about 75 different organizations, corporations, as well as educational institutions that are involved in the commercial spaceflight arena. We're kind of the whole ecosystem of the commercial spaceflight world. We represent spaceports. We have about 10 spaceports that we represent. We represent the launch providers, SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, Sierra Nevada, companies like that, Maston, and also the payloads that are going up. And some of these companies, hope to have human payloads and passenger-carrying vehicles, as well as satellites. And then actually beyond what we're doing in low Earth orbit, working on experiments on the International Space Station, as well as exploration to the Moon and Mars and beyond. So that's a minority of our companies, but most of us are, within the terrestrial and low Earth orbit. I just have prepared remarks very shortly, but I'm speaking today to offer the Commercial Spaceflight Federation's strong endorsement for the passage of HB 734, the Georgia Spaceflight Act. Over the past decade, the commercial space industry has developed, tested, and invested in new capabilities and services that are beginning to significantly expand America's economic sphere from the edge of space, low Earth orbit, to beyond. As the commercial space industry continues to grow, Georgia has an opportunity to position itself as an attractive hub for the industry's future space business activities and operations, bringing significant economic and inspirational benefits to the citizens of Georgia. Already, Georgia has a number of attributes that makes it a fertile ground for future commercial space activities, including the access to such a talented workforce pool from the University of Georgia, Columbus State, and Georgia Tech Aerospace engineers, as well as launch and manufacturing infrastructure at the future spaceport Camden. By passing HB 734 and codifying what already considered widely accepted industry best practices, you and your fellow lawmakers will further encourage the 21st century industry to innovate and safely operate in Georgia. Why Georgia? The U.S. suborbital companies are leading the development of reusable vehicles, creating versatile platforms to service diverse markets for research, space tourism, and education and other applications. Orbital providers, such as SpaceX and Blue Origin, are increasing access to space for a wide variety of customers, including small sats, national security payloads, and geostationary communication satellites. This is a positive trend for the United States after nearly 2 decades of decline. We're finally recapturing the market share in the commercial launch sector. In order to support the growth in launch activities, many states have been competitively investing in commercial spaceports to ensure their state economies have a key role in the 21st century business. I feel Georgia, with Spaceport Camden, is well positioned to access this growing market. When I took over as president of the Commercial Spaceflight Industry, Commercial Spaceflight Federation, 18 months ago, I made it a priority to personally visit all our member companies all over the great nation, from Midland, who has a spaceport, to Mojave, to Seattle, to Florida, and the Florida Cape. And I'm energized and beyond enthused about what I've seen. The commercial space industry is alive and well in the U.S., and the U.S. is leading the way. We're experiencing private sector investment unlike anything we've seen in history. And it's because these investors, we see the expansion of the economic sphere into space as real and very close. In fact, just last year alone, there was over $15 billion in private sector commercial investment. As you debate legislation this year, I'd implore you to think of the commercial industry as a valuable and tremendous partner that will continue to help the United States, as well as the great state of Georgia, achieve our ever more ambitious missions in space and codify the competitive policies that will maintain the domestic commercial space industry's global leadership for years to come. We applaud you and your local Camden County officials for your leadership and vision in developing this pro-growth bill. We thank you and your colleagues and all of your staff for working on the many contributions in advancing this legislation, and look forward to its passage into law. And I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. Let me ask a question. What do you see as a need for another space launching area, whether it be on the East Coast or in the United States? Where does the need grow, and how do we gauge that?
It grows out of the growing capacity in the launch market. As I mentioned, there was a doldrum in the U.S. commercial launch market due to a lot of export controls that limited the U.S. capability. Now, with a lot of the emergence of these commercial space companies, for instance, SpaceX, they've brought the cost of launch and access to space down by orders of magnitude. Historically, a launch vehicle would run, it could range anywhere from $120 million up to $300 million. Now, a SpaceX launch vehicle, I'm not endorsing SpaceX, but just for an example, a SpaceX launch vehicle is in the order of about $65 million to $70 million for a regular low Earth orbit launch. And by bringing that cost of access to space down, you're increasing the possibilities of access to space. There's a company we represent that brokers, if you have a small satellite, they will say, hey, I can get you on a Delta rocket, or I can get you on an Atlas rocket. They have such demand that they end up, instead of putting onesies and twosies on different launch vehicles as payloads, they've bought their own launch vehicle because the demand is so great. And again, as that cost comes down, there's going to be greater access. And that's just on the payload side, not to mention what's happening in kind of the space tourism business. I was just out in Mojave, and Richard Branson, who is CEO of Virgin Galactic, rolled out their new Spaceship Two vehicle. And already 800 people have signed up to go to space on Spaceship Two. I guess the new name is Spaceship Unity. But it's real, and it's very viable. And Camden's well situated with its location.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Mr. Mealing.
Mealing, that's correct.
Thank you.
Introduce
yourself. Who do you represent?
I represent the Georgia Space Society. We are the local Georgia chapter of the National Space Society. We have about 200 members around the state. The National Space Society has tens and thousands of members around the country and around the world. That's my main job, but my family lives north of Camden. My sister lives 13 miles from the spaceport. Grew up down there. So I have a kind of a personal vested interest in seeing Southeast Georgia grow economically. It needs the jobs down there. And the kind of the final one is I co-founded a launch company in 2005 in Mojave. So I have some experience in building a launch company, and one of the requirements that you look for is legal clarity. When the industry got started early on, one of our issues was, will the government let us do this, and what will happen when somebody sues us and put us out of business? And that is still a very large concern, and that's why every time we have a spaceport and every time you build a launch company, you spend a large amount of money on lawyers dealing with the fact that you don't know what's going to happen. And that's the issue, is you don't know. And so that's why legislation like this is needed for the launch companies. It's needed by people that build components. There's an entire supply chain that liability spreads down toward. And that's one of the things in Georgia we're looking for, is not just the launch companies, but the people that build the payloads, the people that build the pieces for the payloads. Given how contributory negligence works, that supply chain is at risk, and we want as much of that supply chain to be here, because my family, friends, and people I graduated high school with down in Southeast Georgia would like to be able to work for one of these companies.
All right. Any questions? Yes, sir. You got a question, Mr. Bruce? Yes, sir.
What I've heard consistently at these hearings is that you, as an industry, don't know what's going to happen as you continue to explore and grow your industry. And from what I'm picking up from this is that you want to be protected against what you don't know might happen out there. But in giving you that protection, are we not taking the protection away from citizens who also don't know what you're going to do out there? And that's the balance that I'm trying to deal with, because it appears that you're saying protect me from what I don't know is going to happen, but make citizens, other citizens that's not in your industry, vulnerable to what they don't know is going to happen.
Correct, but in this case, the industry is so new that the risk to that average citizen is very, very, very low because the launch rates are not high. This is not something like asking for the same level of liability protection for Hartsfield-Jackson because the airline industry is mature and we know what those are. So the expectation is once this industry becomes as mature as the airline industry, we will know what those limits are. And that way we can protect them. But at this point, the liability protection the industry is looking for, the number of launches that happen on a given year is equivalent to the number of flights that leave Hartsfield-Jackson every minute.
Okay, but
so the level of risk is much different.
But you're talking about risk as it relates strictly to the flight leaving the ground, going up, coming back.
Right.
And I'm looking at it from the standpoint of you don't know what you're going to hit or touch or whatever when you get out there. And if you go out there and you know, by virtue of just being there, you're upsetting the atmosphere, whatever you want to call it, and somehow people that's still down here on the planet are impacted by whatever it is that you're doing out there, you would be indemnified against anything that you cause. I mean, and that's what I don't get it. You know, I watch Star Trek like everybody else. I don't know what you're going to find out there. You don't know what you're going to find out there. But while you're looking, you could be upsetting the norm that exists for everybody down here right now.
And that is covered by the FAA's regulations that cover that entire aspect. That's where the term the uninvolved third party comes from, protecting everybody else from something you may do. And I'm going to kind of defer to my colleague here because that's the way the industry has been developed, is the FAA is the arbiter of that entire question, and they're very strenuous about how much they protect that.
The FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation really oversees that in the licensing and the mission authorization and the payload requests on what's being sent up. And that's all falling under this regime of space traffic management. As you're talking about what goes up, they really do have a very clear picture in coordination with the Department of Defense, with the Joint Space Operations Center, the JSPOC, as well as with civilian agencies that they work with, other civilian agencies. They really do have a very good, clear picture on what goes up and when it's going up and where it's going up to avoid conjunction analysis like that could happen any kind of accident in space. That's why launch times are very precise, and you have a very narrow window when you can launch. It's like shooting a bullet up into the sky and making sure nothing is going in that direction. It's very
one last quick question. If we take away any of the liability, so to speak, that you would have as you do all these things, what's left in place to ensure that you are doing things as safely as possible? In other words, if there's a situation where there's no consequence to what you do, then you'll do anything. But if there is some consequence, you might think twice about what you do.
Well, the consequence is it's a commercial marketplace. And for instance, any of these commercial launch providers, if they're not operating the safest possible business they can, especially if they're paying customers, they're not going to be in business very long. I mean, it's such a niche market, and the competition is so strong to get these customers that it is in these companies' best interest to have the safest possible regimes that they can. And you really see that enforced and regulated with the FAA, and it's a really great partnership that the industry has with with our regulators, the Office of Commercial Space Transportation, and these commercial companies. And that was what a lot of the federal legislation that was signed into law in a great bipartisan spirit. Actually, it was unanimous consent in the Senate that it's this partnership with the industry as well as the government regulators.
All right.
If I can jump in real quick. One of the things, in order to be able to launch, you have to get a launch license from the FAA. And so that level of regulatory oversight that the FAA provides to determine have you done everything necessary to meet their safety requirements to prevent that damage to the uninvolved third party before you can fly, you have to get that launch license from the FAA. So you do have a regulatory body overseeing that.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clear something up. Isn't it true, gentlemen? Thank y'all for being here today. Isn't it true what we're doing in this bill is we're simply addressing the space flight participant, and we're specifically saying on lines 154 through 157 that anyone besides the space flight participant, still all the regular tort law in Georgia is applicable to any other nuisance or any other areas. We're talking about someone who has agreed to go up in a space flight, who has signed a waiver with given full informed consent. So we're only talking about that one person here, and the rest of tort law in Georgia will be applicable to any negligence that arises in the participation of a space flight.
That is correct.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you, sir.
Let me call next Kevin Long, Dick Parker, I believe is that correct? Both of y'all, please come forward. All right.
One more chair.
May have to do some switching.
Yeah, that's fine.
Musical chairs in a minute.
I'll just stand up and you guys come out, and I'll just step aside.
A little tight in here. I know. I'm sorry about that. Just got a crowded room.
Chairman Willard, John Watson,
Yes, sir.
Massey, Watson, and Hembry, recently engaged to represent the folks of Coastal Communities, Inc. They're going to testify on their behalf. Wanted to say thank you to this committee for their effort to constrain the bill. Sure. We know and acknowledge that has indeed taken place. With that remaining, there still are some differences and some opinions that we would express and hope for the committee's consideration today. Thank you for your time.
Good to see you, Ms. Watson.
Thank
Always.
You.
Gentlemen, please introduce yourselves, and if you could, keep your comments. I know we're getting lengthy here, but as much as you can on
Yes,
the
sir.
same point and not be repetitive. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee members, for giving us an opportunity to have public comment on this bill today. My name is Kevin Lang. I'm an attorney with Fortson, Bentley & Griffin in Athens, Georgia. I've got family in Camden County going back 5 generations. I would submit to this committee today that this bill is really not about a participant's willingness to sign their rights away on a space flight. What's in front of you today is really more about an attempt to get something out of the General Assembly entitled the Georgia Space Flight Act. And the importance of that is that the proponents of this facility, they want to give an imprimatur of state endorsement or state support to what is a very speculative and very fragile effort to have a spaceport in Camden County. There are a lot of reasons that this spaceport is not a good idea. They're both economic. They're risk to private property. There's risk to people. There's risk to the environment. I'm going to focus on one of those because I know you guys don't want to hear me talk for a long period of time. I'm going to focus on the risk that it poses to the Cumberland Island National Seashore. As you guys know, and this is not part of the elevator speech that you guys get on this bill, but this facility is inland. And in fact, it is 4 to 5 miles inland. These rockets must traverse the Cumberland Island National Seashore to get up and out, which is the industry term for safely getting a rocket up into the atmosphere. That is a fact, and that's a fact that is uncontroverted and can't be disputed. Any trajectory that these guys are thinking about using traverses the Cumberland Island National Seashore. It is also a fact that these rockets explode. Just last year, SpaceX, who I assume is one of the operators that Spaceport Camden is probably going to want to come to this facility, they lost 2 Falcon 9 rockets within 4 weeks of each other that were meant to refuel the International Space Station. This industry is not without risk. I'm here to tell you today, if a rocket explodes over the Cumberland Island National Seashore, it does damage that cannot be fixed, cannot be replaced. This is a coastal barrier island that is preserved, that is a national park, and if we have one explosion over the Cumberland Island National Seashore, it does damage that can't be fixed. There are a number of reasons, both economic and from a risk to property, that this is not a good idea. But I want you guys to focus on the steps in front of Camden County as you consider this bill and consider the timing of this legislation relative to those steps. The FAA has not yet determined that it's safe to launch a rocket over the Cumberland Island National Seashore. Cumberland Island National Seashore includes Little Cumberland Island, which has private residents. It also includes Big Cumberland Island, which has private residents. These people have residences there. There are people that are there all year round. These aren't, as Representative Spencer and others have said, these aren't occasional visitors. There are people there year round. that are going to be affected by this. Secondly, Camden County can't tell you, at least they haven't told us, what the Navy thinks about this plan. There's a nuclear submarine base within miles of this facility. We don't yet know what the Department of Defense is going to say about having a commercial spaceport located in close proximity to Trident nuclear warheads. They also don't know what the Department of Interior is going to say about this project because they haven't commented yet. We're currently under an EIS process that's going to last 9 to 12 months minimum, if not longer, where the public has an opportunity to comment. There was a record number of comments submitted against this facility. The FAA has never gotten the number of negative comments and concerns that they've gotten about this proposed facility, and a lot of that has to do with its location. My point to you today is Camden County has a lot of steps to be taken to make this facility a reality, and the Georgia legislature passing what's in front of you looks like a very innocuous, narrow piece of legislation, but what you're doing is you're putting something out there called the Georgia Spaceflight Act, and then I can tell you it's going to be sold as a state endorsement of this facility. And if you endorse this facility and Camden County builds it, and it ends up like a lot of other spaceports without enough demand to generate enough revenue, and it has to be subsidized, don't be surprised if they come back to this body looking for state subsidy, because Camden County is a $51 million a year county, annual budget. They spent $2 million so far pursuing this venture, which is a significant portion of that annual revenue. If they can't float the bonds, if they can't pay the bonds that are used to build this facility, the taxpayers in Camden County can't afford to pay them either. So this is a big gamble, and if it doesn't work out, you guys passing this innocuous bill that ends up making its way through the General Assembly could result in Camden County coming back and asking the state to subsidize this facility.
We don't do that.
Understood.
Yes, sir. Next.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for your work and your commitment to the state. My name is Dick Parker. I'm from Cedartown. I live in Decatur now, and my wife and I have property on Little Cumberland Island. In the early 70s, my father was in the state senate. He served as he was chairman of the Game and Fish Subcommittee of the Natural Resources Committee. And on several occasions, when I was a teenager, he went down to Jekyll Island to meet with Joe Tanner, who was Commissioner of Natural Resources at that time, and he invited me down there for those trips. I particularly remember these would be educational trips where he would learn about. Mr. Tanner would be explaining the coastal system, the marshes, the dune vegetation, and out of those conversations came numerous Georgia laws which protected the Georgia coast. I remember riding in the back seat across the Jekyll Causeway with Mr. Tanner and my dad in the front seat talking about these issues, and he was talking. Mr. Tanner was explaining how the particular ownership of the islands in the state of Georgia, state, private, and federal, had protected the Georgia coast through all these years, and all of this was fascinating to me as a 15-year-old kid from North Georgia, and I fell in love with the Georgia coast. And so when I was in college, I worked 2 summers for the Jekyll Island Authority, living and breathing the salt air. During those summers at Jekyll, I learned how to cast net for shrimp and pull a seine and bait a hook with a fiddler that we'd caught, and then after work go down to the wharf and watch the shrimpers come in and or listen to the marsh hens. Today it's exciting to see what the state's commitment and investment is doing to transform Jekyll Island into a 21st century destination, much unlike what I had seen back in the 70s. And I read recently that it's attracting tourists in large numbers again. As a property owner of Little Cumberland Island, I'm concerned for our personal investment if rockets go over our island and have a problem. But as a Georgian, I'm concerned about the fundamental day-to-day change that's going to be brought by the frequent test firings of rocket engines over at this facility. I don't know if you've looked at it on the map exactly where it is, but the proposed site is right at the mouth of the Satilla River at St. Andrews Sound, so that nothing but marsh and open water separate it from Cumberland, Little Cumberland, and all of Jekyll Island south of the bridge and the causeway. And you know how sound travels over open water, especially in a quiet place like our coast. We believe passage of a bill titled the Georgia Spaceflight Act, even if the text appears innocuous, gives the impression that our state has endorsed the full scope and impact of the spaceport and moves it a step closer to reality. And I ask you to please continue to study the full impact of our investments on the Georgia coast before you take this important step, because you may be changing the way future generations of Georgians and visitors to our state experience a very special place. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next we have is, I believe, John Morrissey, Glenn Lightsey. Trying to give everybody a chance. We got a long list, and I'm suspecting if we go through the lengthy statements, I wish you'd hold to what is the questions you have as to the propriety of the space launch being there, supporting it, or opposed to it. And we'll try and get through the whole list. You're next, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, committee members. First of all, I'm a citizen of St. Mary's.
And your name?
John Morrissey.
Yes, sir.
And I am a citizen of St. Mary's, but I'm also a citizen of Camden County. I just happen to be the mayor of St. Mary's.
All right, sir.
As in addition to that, so I'm here on a personal basis, but I wanted to share some thoughts with you because I think there was some consideration for how much interest there was within the county and the cities relative to this project, and I would like to reinforce the interest that's here. And let me tell you that is an intense interest. The opportunity for space flight in Camden County has done nothing but allow the newspapers and the media to share a lot of facts, and I think that's what we're looking for as citizens within St. Mary's and within the county. There's no doubt that there's across-the-board discussions that are clear and lucid and looking for facts. They're being provided by the space industry, by the county, through communication mechanisms that they have established, and they're scrutinized very intensely. We want you to know that we don't take any of the information that's passed along without some kind of intense scrutiny relative to the veracity and also where the facts are coming from and how they're being created. It's important that you understand that, and that the community is doing that. Many of us feel that the process in looking at this project, that the coexistence of an advanced technology and the wonder of the environment along the coast can indeed happen. The community, the neighbors, and the environment can all be made to work together and to function together. Now, we know that this industry has safety protocols and operational protocols beyond the norm for what many of us have experienced. So we are making sure in our own mind that these protocols and safety issues, as they're being discussed and brought up here today, are indeed going to be followed. And you hear conversations relative to the FAA and what's going to happen with other agencies like the EPA and the DNR, et cetera, going. Those are all going to be part of the decision making. But we wanted to come back here today and just make you sure you understand the community is intensely interested in this project, the opportunity that it could bring. We want to make sure it's done the right way. Can it be done? What will it bring to us in the way of opportunity? The point I think that I'd like to leave you with, it's significant. The development of the economy in southeast Georgia, particularly the bottom of the coast, is very important. And as much so, I think we don't want to lose the sight of the fact that the science and the exploration that could come out of that whole project and that location is significant not only for the Georgia coast, but for the state of Georgia and for the country. And the ability to be able to launch and have the largest window possible north of Cape Kennedy is very, very exciting. I'm not a scientist, but I'm a mayor.
Okay.
And I know on a smaller scale, projects like this, we do our homework, we do our vetting. So please, we'd ask you to consider the fact that the community is interested, and if there's any doubt, we'll be glad to come back and let you know again.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. Yes, sir.
Good day. My name is Glenn Lightsey, and I'm a professor at Georgia Institute of Technology and Aerospace Engineering. Not representing Georgia Tech. I'm here on my own behalf. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a businessman. I am an educator, and I am a person who works in the aerospace industry. What I can tell you is I believe this is a very unique opportunity for the state of Georgia to become a leader in space flight opportunities and the space flight industry. I think it will be a great economic benefit to the state of Georgia. I would submit that we can protect our environment, and there is another quality of life, which is, do people have well-paying jobs? Are they able to be gainfully employed and live the lifestyle that they want? And I believe that the spaceport will really advance the cause for that particular region of Georgia. Also, I want to talk about the inspirational effect of having a spaceport in your state and the basically brain drain that occurs when you do not have a science and engineering industry. I think we can turn this around into a benefit for Georgia, because instead of graduates of all of our universities going to other states to support their industries, they will be attracted to stay in Georgia and support the aerospace industry. So I think it's really beneficial, not only for people retaining highly educated people, but it's also inspirational for children in STEM education fields.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Oliver, did you have? Oh, I'm sorry.
So you're trying to tell Representative Maber and Representative Bennett, both Georgia Tech graduates, that this would help Georgia Tech. Is that what you're doing?
I think it would help Georgia.
Okay.
You're out of order. Yes, sir. Ms. Bennett. No, here we go. I got my Tech and Georgia guys fighting. All right, thank you both for being here. Mr. Jim Gant and Bert Guy. It's a little tight, I know. Gets a little warm in here too, as you notice.
It's a little warm in here, absolutely. Right. Well, Bert said I could go first.
All right, Mr. Gant.
My name is Jim Gant, and I'm the mayor pro tem in St. Mary's.
Okay.
And of course, I agree 150% with our mayor.
All needs to be said.
Because I'm a good politician.
All right.
But that aside,
yes, sir.
Let me give you a little background on myself. I arrived in Camden County in 1982 as a Navy commander, Civil Engineer Corps. And I was sent to Camden County, among others, to build the Navy base there.
Right.
$2.2 billion program, which has created a fantastic Navy base. Have all of you been there? Yeah. You need to tour Naval Submarine Base Kings Bay. But now we're talking a 17,000-acre facility. Today employs 9,000 employees, and it brings in something like $900 million a year into the region. At the time when I got there, we were looked at as outsiders. And there were a lot of people saying, we don't want the Navy there. And they also doubted that we can build a Navy base, a nuclear base, safely. Well, we had to go through the EIS, just like the spaceport has to go through the environmental impact statement. Very extensive study. That study, and I was the head of planning, design, and construction, guided everything we did from that point on. We had to comply with the findings in the EIS. We had to design and build to the EIS, and they're still running the base based on the EIS and the findings. That base is a model. It fits into the environment. It certainly is maybe or not as dangerous as a spaceport. I would say that it's not, but it might be. But the point I'm making is that a spaceport in Camden County can be constructed within the environmental that it's in, the environment that it's in a safe way that meets the different criteria that we have to meet to put that very vital facility there.
In fact, they'll have to get an EIS approval, right?
EIS is underway right now.
Okay.
It's well into the process. In fact, we had the FAA conduct a hearing in December, and the population in Camden County turned out like I have never seen them turn out for anything. Very strongly, the majority were for Spaceport Camden. It's a game changer, just like the Naval Submarine Base is a game changer.
Sure was.
And it's a game changer not only for Camden County, but for the state of Georgia. I was lucky, because I'm an engineer, to be involved in the initial vetting of the site. And I've walked the site, I've looked at the site. I'm no space expert, not even saying I am, but that is the best spaceport location anywhere. And as far as the Navy is concerned, it's 9 miles or 10 miles down the coast to the south. There are many spaceports. There are spaceports that shoot much closer to a military base than Naval Submarine Base is today.
Right.
So from that standpoint, I can't imagine, even though the Navy will be part of the EIS process, I can't imagine that there's a problem with the Navy. Yes, there may be some people that's discomforted on Cumberland Island, but it's so quick and it's over with so quickly that it's hardly noticeable.
Thank you.
So I could go on, but I will shut up at that
Thank
point.
you, sir. Okay, well,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Guy,
Good to see you. Bert Guy from St. Mary's, Georgia. Enjoyed working on projects all over the great state of Georgia. I'm glad that Georgia is open for business. I'm glad that Georgia is the #1 state in the nation to do business 3 years in a row. And I'm excited about space. When I think about the kind of industries that you as lawmakers are working to bring to Georgia, you've made Georgia the #3 state in the nation for filming movies. You've worked to make Georgia an exciting place to bring automobile dealers, an exciting place to bring biotech firms. This piece of the puzzle fits perfectly in place with everything else that the great job you're already doing for us up here in the Gold Dome. When I think about the excitement of space exploration and and how much I feel like it sort of plays in hand with focusing on STEM education, allowing kids to see the real excitement and goals that they can have in math and science education. You know, as I mentioned, I'm a resident of St. Mary's, but, you know, my family moved to Southeast Georgia in 1805, so we've been living in that part of the world for a long time, and I can tell you that it's important in fact, we've got, I believe, 28 residents of Camden County that are seated in your room today that came up here today in support of this project because we think it's good for Georgia, it's good for Southeast Georgia, but it's good for the whole region. This will help make that whole area a tri-state focus on economic development. So it's going to tie hand in hand with what you're doing. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to see all of you, and I'm excited to support the spaceport.
Are you representing any group, Mr. Guy? Are you?
No, I'm here as a
citizen?
I'm a private citizen.
All right. Well, glad to have you both. Next, we have, I believe, the Development Authority parties, James Coughlin and Charlie Smith. Y'all want to come forward? So happy to see you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Do I get branded in some way for showing up with Charlie? Is that
Be careful what you
That'd
ask
be good
for.
for you. Maybe good for you.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. Y'all, you know, as a development authority, I work closely with the Department of Economic Development, and I can tell you they have brought big projects down to Camden County to look at this site, and because the site was not ready yet, hadn't gone through the EIS. Excuse me. The sites have gone. The projects have gone elsewhere. In one case, there was a a project that was 300 plus jobs, hundreds of millions of dollars of economic investment, and they went to Florida because they were ready. This is one of the things we need to do to be ready to make that happen. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the chairman for his recommendation for me to be in on the space flight program.
That'll be exciting.
But
if you come back, I'm gonna try.
You know, I had the close brush with. I had a close brush with death already on that flag bill, and I'd really kind of rather stay closer to the earth on my tourism. But I thank you for that. I want to say I'm not going to say much. You got a little disinformation from those folks that live on. They don't really live there. That they've got lots on Little Cumberland Island. As you all know, that's a very private enclave. You got to be voted on. Only certain people can qualify to live there. But you got a little information saying that these rockets going to be launched under the Cumberland Island National Seashore. That's not necessarily true. There's a great deal of the azimuth area that would not go over Cumberland Island National Seashore. It's possible that some launches might be over Little Cumberland, but there's also a great area where there's just water out to the northeast of this launch site. The launch site, while it's inland from the island, is right on basically on the coast. It's on the intercoastal waterway. I want to say I've looked, and I have not found any place in the United States where a private citizen not involved in the space program has been injured in any way in any launch in the history of the space program. I haven't found anywhere where any private property has been damaged in the United States by space launches anywhere. They've got very much safety precautions. If you need to blow up that rocket, that trajectory initially goes straight up. It's several miles over there to Little Cumberland from this launch site. I think the danger there is next to none. This particular bill, I don't think the bill does a whole lot at this point in time, frankly. It's been fairly watered down, as you all know. But this bill now, I will say this, I will agree with one of the comments. It sends a message to the space industry. We're competing with a number of states, just like we are for all industry. If this bill is killed and doesn't go forward, the message will be, we're not really interested in the space industry. And that's really, from my perspective, what this bill is all about at this point in time. I would like to see it strengthened to do what's been done in several other states that hasn't caused any harm, as far as I can tell, in any of those other states. They haven't repealed any of it. There hasn't been any negative real impact on those bills. So I would just encourage you to do what I think is good for Georgia, to help bring the space industry into Georgia so we can quit buying rocket motors from Russia and maybe build them right here in the USA. Georgia would be a great place to start. Thank you for your help.
Glad to see you, Mr. Bill. John Corbett and Rachel Baldwin. Mr. Corbett.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Happy to have you with us.
Good to be here.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ms. Baldwin. We'll let the lady go first.
All right.
Always.
Thank you for allowing us to speak this afternoon. I'm Rachel Baldwin. I'm chairman of the Chamber of Commerce following a 30-year history as an educator. I grew up about 11 miles up the road in Smyrna, Cobb County. And I do believe that Georgia has played a significant role in aerospace. And I think, once again, we're sitting at a threshold. I think about where would we be if Mayor Hartsfield had not been a real leader in getting the airport here. And when we look at that, I also think about when I grew up, the C5 was being built out in Marietta. It wasn't very far from my house, and I wasn't smart enough to be scared. But when we saw the shadow of that plane come over the house, it was inspiring. As an educator, I think about opportunities to inspire students. From a Chamber of Commerce perspective, we are really challenged to bring opportunities to South Georgia. We have these two Georgias. We have what is economically developed around Atlanta, and the Georgia Department of Economic Development works very diligently with us to help bring opportunities to South Georgia. But this is a game changer, not only to Southeast Georgia, but it's also a game changer for Georgia as well, and it supports that history that we've had with opportunities and flight. I think I really would like to see this bill strengthened in terms of being the best tool in our toolbox that we can have to be competitive with other states that are bringing in this technology, that are bringing in these opportunities. And I just encourage you to look at that and make us the best advantaged state, just like we have been able to do with other sectors.
Your Chamber of Commerce is at the Camden County
Yes,
Chamber?
sir.
Okay. Yes, sir. Mr. Corbett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I come today to voice my support for House Bill 734, the Spaceflight Act. You've heard all the economic impact and everything on Southeast Georgia, the positive impact it will have. I would like to let's look at this from a different angle through the a conversation I had with the school superintendent last Thursday night, Dr. Will Harden, and this conversation, he says, Camden County and the surrounding counties, they graduate some of the best and brightest students in Georgia, and they send them off to the best colleges in Georgia, Florida, Alabama, all over the United States. And when they graduate, with degrees in engineering, science, computer science, technology, mathematics, physics, whatever, they have to move off to earn the high-paying jobs that those degrees demand. What we're asking with the passage of this bill is to, like Ms. Baldwin said, to give them the tool in the toolbox to help bring space flight to Camden County, where they can bring some of these jobs back to Camden County, where they can bring some of these students back home. Passing this bill, it's not going to guarantee they're going to get the space flight to Camden County, but if we don't pass it, you can pretty well guarantee they won't. So I'd like to just voice my support for it. And thank you for your consideration.
Appreciate you coming in too. Thank you. I believe the last, two more. We got. Andrew Nelson, Bob Scorange, I believe it is. Is that correct? You like to come forward? Pardon me? Oh, sure. Identify yourself and who you represent, please.
Thank you, sir. My name is Andrew Nelson, and I'm the former president of X-Corp Aerospace, one of the launch companies. I'm also now a consultant to Camden County. I'm their resident space geek, I guess you could say. So I just wanted to talk about a few of the clarifications for the committee to hear. I'd heard some things, and it's in my nature to want to make sure things are as accurate as possible. One of the things I heard earlier from one of the committee representatives was the question about inherent risk versus the timeline of the industry as it matures through the risk profile. And I wanted to point out a few things about the aviation community. The timeline of maturity and risk was greater than 30 or 40 years. There was rapid advancement in the 1920s when the government moved to spur the aviation industry with the Air Carrier Mail Act, which really promoted the development of aviation. But after 15 or 20 years, it did not remove the inherent from the risk in aviation. We then were plunged into World War II. But through World War II, there was a huge advancement in aviation. Again, millions of planes, I think hundreds of thousands of planes were built, millions and billions of hours flown. But even at the end of World War II, we did not remove the inherent from the risk in aviation. It wasn't until the 50s and 60s when the jet age was entered and the engine technology developed that truly the inherent was applied to safety. And so in the future of space, we do have a huge learning curve. Even though we've started flying rockets 40 or 50 years ago, the number of rocket flights, the number of people who've been into space is still under 550 today. So clearly there's a long way to go before inherent is removed from risk in the space industry. There was a question about what is needed and what are the drivers that are driving this commercial space industry. We heard about the cost curve coming down, but there's reusability being entered, which will drive the cost curve down even further. Today, with some of the legacy launchers, you're talking about a cost per pound to get to orbit of between $10,000 and $20,000. SpaceX is now starting to offer those flights at perhaps a $4,000 to $5,000 per pound to orbit basis. But what they are projecting at places like SpaceX and United Launch Alliance and Virgin Galactic and others is that price will soon drop potentially to $100 to $200 per pound to orbit. And when you have that drastic drop in price, you will have an increase in demand. There's another factor working in the demand, which is Moore's Law. The same thing that took our cell phones from bigger than this to now this is happening in satellites. Satellites today are the size of city buses. But today we can have a satellite this big that does about 40 to 50% of what that big satellite used to do in 1960 or 70. So it is the future, but the future's today. Someone asked, are we taking away the rights of citizens with this bill? And we're not. This bill only addresses the spaceflight participant. But in fact, the uninvolved public is covered by the federal law. And I described it at one of the subcommittee meetings, and I won't attempt to describe it again today since I got laughed at the last time. So, but I think the chairman, Mr. Caldwell, remembers. The safety assurances that are provided by the FAA, the first priority of the FAA when they do a safety analysis is safety. It's not commercial, it's safety. And then There were some statements made about SpaceX that lost 2 rockets last 12 months. That's incorrect. They did lose one, and it was 150 miles offshore. They've been practicing to land the first stage back on a barge way out at sea. They haven't quite perfected it because the sea state's been quite high, but they landed one successfully back on land. But they've only lost 1 rocket. Residents all year round on Little Cumberland Island is not accurate. In fact, the census tracts show that there are 0 full-time residents.
Let me ask a question on something
Yes, sir.
that comes to mind. Most of what we're talking about currently of use of a launch place will be for satellites. Am I right? We don't have launches where people are going up in flight, do we, at this time?
Well, not in this time in the country, but there are 5 different companies now who are working on those systems, and they plan to launch within the next 12 to 18 months.
I'm just saying today.
But absolutely today. Yep.
Okay.
I think Wayne Gretzky said we need to spacate to where the puck's going to be and not where it is today.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So what we have mostly in this bill, a lot of it deals with people going up in flight.
Yes, sir.
So we're looking at preparation of that. Am I asking the right question today? If you wanted to launch a satellite from this Camden site, could you do it whether this bill was in place or not?
After the FAA granted the spaceport license, yes, sir.
So the thing we're covering in this bill is the potential of human space flight.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a real possibility at this site. It's just another payload, whether you're bringing a phone or someone my size.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Oliver.
And to get the permit, you have to complete the environmental impact study. And where are you time-wise on that?
Yes, ma'am.
I know
So-
you've started, but when will it end? Do you know?
Yes, we're expecting a draft EIS to be issued early summer. It will then go through a period of review, a month or 2, and then it will then be a notice of record will be issued by the FAA.
So the federal process for y'all to be eligible for investors to come and do something, that has to be completed first.
Yeah, in the next 4 to 5 months, we should have an answer, and then sort of the recruitment cycle for a company, of course, is 18 months or more. So we actually want to have this in hand because you don't want to wait.
But the permit process comes before the recruitment process. I'm trying to get a timeline in my mind.
Well, in fact, so the permitting process will include the EIS.
And then after the EIS, what's the next step to a permit?
Okay, so the permit application will be submitted shortly after the EIS, assuming the EIS result is good. There's a 180-day statutory review required by the FAA.
So that's a year from now, then.
So that
before you get your permit at your earliest opportunity.
Yep, exactly. But we believe that there are, based upon other examples of spaceport permitting, okay, if we find that the safety analysis meets the federal mandate and requirement and the EIS is passed, there's really, except for the Chief of Naval Operations saying, no, we don't want this, or perhaps the National Park Service saying we don't want this, then, and that's going to be known in the EIS, then we would expect that a spaceport license would be issued after the 180-day period.
But that's a year from now. Your fastest, best case scenario, a year from now.
But still, advanced positioning of the spaceport is a good business practice. It's done in other spaceports. Midland did it. Mojave did it before their spaceport license. And the one up in Virginia, Kodiak, Alaska, it's a common practice.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Scoringe, pronounce that?
Very good, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
My name is Bob Scoringe. I'm here representing myself, and I worked for EMS Technologies in Norcross for 15 years. EMS was the largest space company in the state, and I've researched this industry, and I want to share some of my thoughts with the committee. A business development person basically asks 2 questions when they look at a new market, and that's where to compete and how to compete. On the where to compete issue relative to the space industry, I think this is a relatively settled issue. There are 10 industries that the state of Georgia pursues. The aerospace industry is one of them, albeit we do a much better job right now in the aeronautics side of the aerospace industry than in the space industry. And the upside in the space part of the aerospace industry is considerably greater. Right now we have 0.1% market share of a $330 billion global space industry. With a reasonable effort in the next 3 to 5 years and the type of legislation you're considering today, It's not unreasonable to envision a 1% market share, maybe 2 in 3 to 5 years. And doing the math, a 1% additional market share in this global industry is $3.3 billion of additional revenue into the state per year. That's for every 1% additional market share. So what's possible in 3 to 5 years? Maybe 2%, maybe 2.5%. So it's a settled issue relative to whether or not we should be going after the space industry. So the second question is how to compete. Georgia can compete very well in this industry. We have not up to this point. There's been mention of we've lost a few deals. We don't have all the tools in the tool bag. But Georgia can win against other states in the space industry in terms of attracting manufacturers in the space industry. And if you believe the FAA, for every additional dollar that's spent, direct dollar, you get a 2 to 3 times multiplier in terms of economic impact. So those numbers I mentioned before of $3.3 billion for every additional 1% of market share. And by the way, another 2,200 jobs approximately associated with a 1% market share. You can multiply that by 2 or 3 and envision the impact of a 2 or 3% additional market share. Georgia can win. Georgia Tech produces more engineers, in fact more aerospace engineers than any program in the country. As mentioned before, unfortunately, a lot of those young people that were in here earlier today go out of state once they get their degree because there are no opportunities in the space industry in the state, or very few currently. Georgia is a right-to-work state. Areas of the country where there is a high concentration of space industry employers and therefore jobs, like California, Colorado, and Washington State, are not right-to-work states. Another advantage Georgia would have, attracting a relocation of a new manufacturing plant or a new manufacturing plant itself. Last but not least, Camden County as a spaceport would be the crown jewel for Georgia that would attract a lot of industry. And once you get the launch manufacturers who want to locate their manufacturing plants near to where they launch, and the payload manufacturers who want to locate near launch points for the same reason, they will soon realize that from Georgia they can support 4 launch points: Spaceport Camden, Cape Kennedy, Cape Canaveral, and Spaceport Virginia via barge. So Georgia has a logistics play here in terms of a greater logistics activity. And in conclusion, I'd like to say I encourage this group to support this industry and give us the tool that we need to compete against other states in the space industry.
Thank you. Just let me ask you a question. How far is Camden County into developing its plan? I guess what you're looking at, total cost, construction, means of financing, all this. Where does it stand with all that part of it?
We have the county administrator here in the audience. I think, would you like to get the answer directly from the county administrator?
The county administrator, the one that has that, I guess as a consultant, plans been put together.
I could dive in if you want.
Yeah. Can you respond to that question?
That is a loaded question. I will tell you that. But where we're at now currently is we're taking the steps, the milestones to continue to accomplish this project. We have had discussions with public-private partnerships, and that's one of the things we're going to actually go after as we clear the CIS. So there's lots of models that you could actually do. That's where we're at now.
Okay.
So that's what I answer for you tonight.
All conceptual at this point?
That's correct. And the most important thing is to clear the CIS as well as to continue to build momentum.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've got, I think, one last person. And I know you too, Mr. Jones, and David Ball of Mr. Ball.
Thank you.
Come up, sit with him, Mr. Jones.
Thank you.
Y'all be new friends.
Hey, Mr. Jones. How you doing? Always good to meet you. You want him to go first, or he wants to end? You want to end? I'll wrap it up. I don't want to be the butt of this whole thing. So, I'm David Ball. I was lucky enough to be on the environmental subcommittee for the spaceport, representing Cumberland Island. We've had property on the north end of Cumberland Island since 1929. And after the trickle-down effect with the Candler family, we have about 15 of my generation. So I kind of take offense to when people say, well, there's no full-time residency. I've moved twice in my life from Atlanta to Statesboro, Georgia, And I've always had Cumberland, though, as my home, as my place, I like to say, is where I want to be buried, or you can throw my dust out into the sand. It doesn't matter to me. So let's throw that out of the question here. I can't tell you if I'm for the spaceport or against it. I'd rather be one of those guys that sit here and goes, EIS. Let's wait to see what they say. See if these 480 questions we sent them, see what it comes back and says. I'm not sure why we can't put this thing off till next year, because we've already heard it's going to be this time next year when all this stuff is going to come out anyway. I don't know why, So I'm not sure what I'm for.
Okay.
I'm glad to say that because everybody else seems to know what side who's on. Why don't you go ahead, because that's about all I got to say. Thank you.
Glad you came by too, Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, Mr. Jones.
My name is Jeff Jones. I represent District 167, which includes portions of Glenn County, McIntosh, and Long counties. Glenn County and McIntosh are the two counties going north up the coast from Camden. I want to speak in very strong favor of this bill, HB 734, and of Spaceport Camden. And I'm just going to be very brief. From an environmental standpoint, my record of supporting and protecting the Georgia coast is on record last year with the efforts that I undertook to help pass the marsh buffer bill. And knowing that, I still give my very strong support to this passage of this bill and to Spaceport Camden. One other economic issue or impact item that wasn't mentioned specifically is these aerospace jobs average $80,000 to $90,000 per job. Those are good paying jobs for the state of Georgia. This would be a good economic impact for the state of Georgia. Let me close by saying Senator Ligon was in here just a few minutes ago. He was unable to stay, but Senator Ligon also is in support of Spaceport Camden and this moving ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I think we've provided a lot of good public input this afternoon, and we will now close all further comments. The House Bill 734, and we're working from LC 296994S, is now in the breast of the committee, and I recognize Ms. Oliver. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Fleming, excuse me.
Move do pass, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion do pass, seconded. Do we have discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I had a chance to sit in on the subcommittee, and I don't know if Bill Clark's still in the room, but it was my understanding that the bill that was in front of the subcommittee that contained the language on gross negligence was okay with them. They had worked that out. And listening to the testimony today, it would be my intent to offer an amendment to put that back into the bill.
All right, we have the motion for a do pass. It's time for any amendments.
Mr. Chairman, I think we only took it out in one place. Is that right, Mr. Spencer?
That's correct.
And you want to tell us exactly where that was, or do you want to have your lawyer come tell us?
Line 93.
93, in front of the word negligence, right?
And that was it? You sure? Mr. Chairman, I would move that we replace the word gross back in front of negligence on line 93.
All right. Been moved and seconded to replace the word gross on line 93 after entities and before negligence. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Do you have any discussion? Is that what you're? Thank you, Ms. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Fleming, for making the motion. I was glad to second it, though there were a couple. And the reason is, and y'all on the committee know that I'm a plaintiff's lawyer, and I'm not usually one to get upset about making sure that or I'm not usually one who's going to want to limit liability. But here, if we weren't to put this gross negligence back in, we are basically, in my opinion, erasing the assumption of the risk doctrine. And I don't think that we should be in the business of doing that in this committee. If people want to get on these rockets and go up into space, it's inherently risky, and they need to assume that risk.
Thank you. Do we have any further discussion on the motion? If not, the chair will call for the question. The question is the First Amendment, the Fleming Amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Do we have any further discussion or amendments? Chair, hearing none, we call for the main question, which is a due pass to LC 296994S, House Bill 734, as a committee substitute. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, like sign? Chair rules the ayes carry it, and the motion carries, and bill passes. Thank you. Glad to have you. We'll give you a few minutes to sort of clear out, if you would, so that we'll have space available for the other bills. See you later. Thank you so much. We're going to next take your conversations outside, please. So we get back to the business at hand. We have two more bills. The first one I'm going to call for, since I got my judges here, is House Bill 1027, LC 297013S, and that is sponsored by Mr. Fleming. And Mr. Fleming, I'll let you lead out. You can have it from your seat. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really didn't know too much about this, except I thought when Judge Jacobs was gone, it would be the last time I have to deal with him. But not so. But it
Hope
is.
springs eternal, doesn't it?
That's right. It is a fairly simple bill that I know Judge Jacobs will explain better than I can. But basically, there was some question, as I understand it, under Georgia law as to whether or not it was possible for local courts to allow electronic filing. And what we are doing is making sure that's the case by court order, by jurisdiction.
This is belt-in suspenders, then.
Belt-in suspenders, and so there'll be no doubt about it. So simply put, that's basically what the bill does. It does not stop anybody from filing by paper. I know Mr. Clark, I don't know if he's in here now, asked about that, and we made sure that was not the case. It doesn't stop anybody from filing by paper if they want to. So all it does is allow the courts to allow electronic filing.
And that's
is that right, Mr. Jacobs?
That is correct.
And that would be perfected by local court rules of each court as to the manner in which they will serve that need. Correct?
That's right.
All right. Anybody want to speak on the bill? Mr. Jacobs, you had your name down, and I know that Judge Altman too. Yep. Y'all want to say anything? You want to just leave it to rest?
Only to I will leave it to rest for the most part. Other than to say that on behalf of the Council of State Court Judges, we very much had wanted to see kind of a blanket general provision allowing for electronic filing included in the code. This bill does that for us. So I thank Representative Fleming very much for carrying the bill and commend it to your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Honor. Anyone else wish to speak for the bill? Judge Altman.
If I may, on behalf of the Judicial Council Standing Committee on Technology and the Council of Magistrate Court Judges, we commend to you the bill. We thank you for your consideration. Ask you to please do pass.
Thank you.
We did fix the one little thing that was in the Magistrate Code that had been lingering out there, and we appreciate getting that taken care of as well. So if there's any questions on that, I'd be happy to.
That's under 151053.
Correct.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
If there's no further public comments, we'll close off further input, and the bill is now in the breast of the committee. Do I have a motion? Motions do pass. Is there discussion? And yes, there is. I believe. Yes, sir. Mr. Bennett.
Quick question about.
See if your mic's on at the bottom.
Hello.
There you are.
Quick question about. So this doesn't restrict people from still paper filing outside. Could there? So we were saying that a local rule could force electronic filing.
That's true. Excuse, I didn't mean to beg your pardon.
I just want to make sure that this wouldn't still prohibit a local rule from my county superior courts to force electronic filing, like I guess in
Fulton County.
Fulton, yeah.
They did that in state court. And Superior Court. Judge Altman, you want to make comment?
If I may, sir.
Come up here where we can have you heard on the mic.
What they're doing in places when they go to electronic filing is providing the public with a scanner and some assistance so that they can still walk in with their piece of paper and get it filed. They'll be directed to a computer with a scanner where they push the button and and it's scanned in right then and there on the spot. But yes, the public is still welcome to walk in with paper. And this bill does not affect that one way or another.
Understand. And
All
again,
right.
and I'm so sorry. Just to be
Go ahead,
clear,
Mr. Bennett.
would this? What about mailing in? Because we can send in right now. You can mail in a complaint and have it all done via mail. Send a check in with the sheriffs. Would that still also be an available mechanism in the event that we're allowing electronic filing?
I think that would be subject to the uniform rule and or local court order, so I'm not sure I
Understood.
can give you a definitive answer that is going to absolutely, yes, be preserved.
Gotcha.
It'll have to be done on a court basis, and so there's no flat answer that can be given.
Understand. Thank you.
Next, I head over here, Mr. Mabra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see what the bill does, and I just want to know about the systems, the electronic filing system, the software. What type of system will be in place? Does anyone know? Heard talk about it, but if someone could clear that up for me, because I know we got 159 counties. We could have, 159 different systems, and it's going to be, a headache trying.
We don't have anybody here from the clerk's authority, but I'll give you what insight limited I have. And there is, of course, each court would have the ability to set up its own software and system for electronic filing. However, with that said, the clerk's authority is trying to establish and be sure there is a uniform type system available to the state and available to all the clerks, with the expectation, again, that they would use that particular vendor. But it is one that comes with each court making and each clerk making its own determination. And we don't have any really means of directing that unless we as a state are prepared to take on the cost of doing it. And that's been sort of the hurdle that keeps us from making that mandate.
Okay, I understand now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. On this side, Mr. Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this might be to the chairman or to the judges here. When set in lines 22, line 22, it says any pleading or document filed electronically shall be deemed filed as of the time, and then on line 23, of its receipt by the electronic filing service provider. Now, that can be, I don't know really what that means, but if I send in, if I file on the federal system, the time that I'm actually, it appears to be uploaded or downloaded or loaded onto the filing system, it marks it right there. Either once it's all downloaded, I think is when it's all downloaded is when it marks it. So I'm not sure what that means, and if I can just get some clarity.
Mr. Judge Altman.
Yes, sir. What the law previously was, and is that a document was deemed filed when it was received by the clerk, and not when it was uploaded. And the uniform rules and the model rules from Judicial Council Standing Committee on Technology, and the way all of the e-file systems everywhere else, including the federal system, work, is that when you upload your file and it's received by the system, that's the moment of filing. If the magistrate code had the language where it's accepted by the clerk, that could be 3 days later. And so if you're a last-minute, last-day filer, you never know when it's going to be received by the clerk in order to have it be accepted. It could be 3 days late, and you'll never know it. Every electronic filing system receives a document, and under the rules is required to acknowledge its acceptance, reception of the document in an email with a time and date stamp, and that is the time of filing. It's intended to be a 24/7 system so that you can come in at 11 o'clock at night on the last day your answer is due and hit the send button.
Okay.
And if I may add to that, Mr.
No.
Chairman.
Well, please, Judge Jacobs.
All right. Just to give Chairman Weldon a little bit of background on the bill. This started out as I mentioned, our council, the State Court Judges Council, had a desire to have a general statute in place generally enabling electronic filing. And so we look to an existing statute in the magistrate code, and that's the one that's the amendment that you were referring to there with your question, and replicated that for state court and superior court. That created some concern within the Judicial Council across all of the courts that the language in that statute is at variance with a uniform superior court rule that's been adopted in this area, Uniform Superior Court Rule 3616. And so what we decided to do, instead of going with a more prescriptive statute that might run interference with an existing Uniform Superior Court rule, was just go with something that is more general, and that's what you have for superior and state courts. And then also to fix the static between the Uniform Superior Court rule and the magistrate court
Why did I open
statute.
this up?
So
I said, why did I open this up?
Well,
well, the magistrate court rule also had adopted the
Here we
same
go.
model language the superior court had.
All right.
And we did so with the anticipation we'd have to come and ask.
Don't talk
them.
yourselves out of your bill. Yes. Let me ask one more thing.
Comment. In subcommittee, Mike Holloman with the Clerk's Authority was here, and that is where this language came from. They said that if we put that language in there, then as soon as it hit electronically, it would be deemed filed electronically.
All right.
That was. They
Good
said that's the
comment.
right way to do it to make sure it's, when it gets there, it's filed.
We're fine with that. No further comments. The chair calls the main question, which is a motion do pass. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next we have will be Mr. Taylor's bill, which is the court service accusation on citations. Tom Taylor, we're doing House Bill 1025, which is committee substitute. What's the number on it?
LC 297018S as in Sierra,
Okay.
sir.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Taylor.
Yes, sir. And I apologize. I've been bouncing in and out. I had 3 other bills in front of committees. We had
Go
tattoos,
ahead. You're here now.
fireworks, and crematories, and
You're
I
here
combined
now.
all of them.
Don't get them mixed up.
A glowing tribute. So. Anyway, this is a bill basically that it's a general bill, but it provides by local law terms for service of mostly for the code enforcement side of the business. It allows tack and mail, tack on, not like Weldon's tack on, but it basically allows mail service or tack on service to the property to serve a code violation issue. In a lot of the mostly the urban counties, we have a lot of absentee landlords, and we have blighted properties where people can't be contacted for a number of years. It basically changes the thing from a personal service to the ability to tack on the property and serve by certified mail the last record of from the tax commissioner for the property ownership. Again, it is a general bill, but it would actually require a local act to follow it up to do this. And Judge Jacobs we had an issue with Recorder's Court, and I'd like to ask him to come up and explain the bill further. Not being the only non-attorney in the room.
Are you sure?
I don't know. Being the only non-attorney in the room, though, I'm going to call my lawyer up.
All right, Mr. Judge Jacobs.
No. Just the judge. All right. The Representative Taylor is correct. This is an issue that came out of the transition from Recorder's Court into Cobb County, where that court had the ability to process citations that were served through a tack and mail method because it was provided for in the county code of ordinances. When we dissolved that court and moved traffic offenses to the state court and ordinance violations to the magistrate court, you then had to default to the methods of service that were set forth in the general code for magistrate court, which do not include tack and mail. In conversing with the county and our chief magistrate, Beryl Anderson, about this bill, there was some concern on Judge Anderson's part that if we made this just generally applicable across the entire state, many magistrate courts would not be prepared to handle that sort of that volume. So
Yes.
that's why you have the local legislation method of activating.
May I ask a question? Looking at line 31, it speaks of leaving a copy of it at the premises where the alleged violation occurred. It doesn't give directions where on those premises that can be left. Is there something that should be stated, nailed to the front door? You can't use the mailbox, of course. That's not permitted by federal law. But what do you do as far as leaving it at the premises?
Well, you could say affixing a copy of it to the front door of the premises or something like that.
Well, hey, where are they going to find it?
Structure?
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
where are they going to find it?
At the
What's the wording we have on the
prominently displayed?
Well, hold on. What's the wording we have about serving of dispossessory warrants? Ms.
That's not off the top of my head.
Well,
Title 44?
I'd like to look at that because there is a specific statement about what I think you can do as far as a dispossessory warrant where you can put it. Just thinking through that.
You're ahead of me there, Mr. Chairman.
So give me. It'll take a few minutes recess while they look that up. If you want to. Smoke them if you got them.
Smoking lamp is outlet.
Was that briefer?
Oh, yes. I'm getting a call from Judge Harvey now. Yeah, yeah. That was at the beginning. You were here. Okay.
And mailing a copy. We have the mailing.
And mailing.
And the mailing is the next line down in the bill. I just don't know what happens when you've got a lot.
I know, it's different. He's been there, yeah.
You don't have a door.
Would the door include the door frame?
The frame, yeah.
Right here, like hang it up right here.
Well, most times I think what they do is they put it in the doorknob or somewhere like that. But they do.
I can tell you what I did. I used to do it.
You do? What do you do?
When I was an intern, what you do is you slide it in between the door, or you use tape and you paste it on the door. You
Right.
also put one in the mailbox.
You do put one in the mailbox? Okay. Well,
That's federal law.
that's probably federal law. Yeah, you don't.
That's what we were doing.
So by leaving a copy on the front door. What's the wording you want on that, Ms. Travis?
Door of the premises.
By leaving a copy on the door of the premises.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to say posting a copy of it? Or leaving a
By
copy?
posting, I think it would be by posting. And posting, attaching. Posting, you think the better word? Okay. And I'll propose the amendment on line 31. A will say posting, and instead of leaving, leave in a copy, and then put in on the door of the, and strike out of it at the. You leave either the, but point is it would read posting a copy on the door of the premises where the alleged violation occurred.
I think you need to leave in of.
Sorry. Pardon me?
I think you need to leave of it. The it refers to the.
By posting a copy of it
Yeah.
on the door. Okay, let's change the wording. Posting a copy of it on the door of the premises is the way it would read. That's a motion. You like that? Okay. What you want? I thought we had a motion. All right, do we have a motion to pass first? I think I did not get a motion to pass put before the committee. I apologize. Motion to pass. All right, seconded? Thank you. Further discussion, the chair will offer the following amendment. On line 31, it will read as follows. Strike out posting, strike out leaving, put in posting. So read a posting a copy of it on the door of the premises. That's the way it will be worded. So the whole thing would read, posting a copy of it on the door of the premises where the alleged violation occurred, semicolon. That's the chair's motion. Is there a second? Second. Any discussion on the motion to amend? All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Do we have any further amendments? If there are none, the chair will call the main question, which is the motion do pass LC 297018S, which is House Bill 1025. Yes, sir. Excuse me.
I apologize to disrupt your. I just wanted to be clear.
Roll there.
I'm so sorry. On Part B of that section, you had mentioned a minute ago that the mailing, Representative Taylor, you said that certified mail, but that word isn't in here. And I wanted to make sure that that wasn't intended to be in here. Is that just a normal mailing was going to suffice?
This calls for normal mailing.
Okay. I just want because you said certified earlier, and I just want to make sure.
My error, probably.
Then we need to, I think it's right, we need to distinguish either first class mail or.
Because there is a distinction between
True.
regular mail, which will stay there, or first class return receipt, which will be
Probably
returned.
my misstatement would be.
All right, do we have an amendment?
I would propose that we change line B to say that first class mail.
They usually, I think, call it regular mail.
Regular mail. I apologize. I'm so sorry. Yes.
It is we use first class hyphenated.
We do?
Class, yes, we do.
Okay.
First class mail.
Mailing by first class mail.
So after the word mailing by first class?
Yes.
After it. Mailing a copy of it by first class.
Mailing a copy of it by first class. That's the way you want it read?
First class?
We'll get Ms. Travis to do the perfecting of the place of the words, recognizing it will be a first class mailing.
Correct.
Any discussion on the Second Amendment? If there being no discussion, the chair will call the question. All in favor of the Bennett Amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Any further amendments? There being no further amendments, the chair will call the main question, which is a do pass LC 297018S. It's House Bill 1025 as amended. Committee substitute. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. There being no further business to come before the committee this evening, we'll stand adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.